Welcome to the Sustainability Research and Innovation Congress 2025 here in Chicago. Our program will begin in 15 minutes. Please welcome the UIC Pep Band bringing energy, rhythm, and Chicago spirit to SRI 2025. Please welcome to the stage Dr. Nick Jones, Executive Vice President and Vice President for Academic Affairs of the University of Illinois System. As the system's Chief Academic Officer, Dr. Jones leads strategy across our 3 universities to strengthen student success, drive innovation, and advance impact through research and education. Dr. Jones will now open our afternoon plenary.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Please come on in. We got an exciting session ahead here. I hope your day has been as energizing, as inspiring as the conversations we've shared so far. I'm so pleased to be able to share this experience with you. SRI is so much more than a conference. It's a global gathering grounded in connection across disciplines, geographies, and ways of knowing. And it's centered on what matters most, building a more sustainable, just, and resilient future together. As the Executive Vice President and Vice President for Academic Affairs for the University of Illinois System, I have the privilege of guiding academic strategy, student success, and research innovation across our 3 universities. At the core of this work is collaboration across disciplines, across institutions, and across borders. That's why SRI is such a powerful and natural fit for us. It reflects the kind of interdisciplinary, solutions-driven work that our faculty, students, and partners are advancing every day, not just in Illinois, but around the world. I'm so excited to introduce our next panel, but before I do, just a few quick housekeeping notes. If you haven't yet downloaded the conference app, I encourage you to do so. It's the best way to stay on top of session locations, speaker bios, and real-time updates. You can also access live translation services in English, Spanish, Portuguese, French, Chinese, Korean, and Arabic directly through the app or by scanning the QR code on the screen. And don't forget to share your thoughts by way of the QR code. Your words will inspire live artwork reflecting the themes of SRI 2025. And if you're posting on social media, don't forget to use #SRI 2025. We'd love to amplify your voice in this global conversation. It's now my pleasure to introduce someone who embodies that same spirit of connection and innovation. Elena Harkness is the Executive Director of Current, a non-profit innovation hub tackling one of our most urgent challenges, water. She's a catalyst for collaboration across public, private, and research sectors, and a national voice in the movement for sustainable, resilient cities. Please join me in welcoming Elena Harkness.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. It's so good to see you all here on the first full day of the SRI Congress. I know I am, as a hometown Chicagoan, so excited to be welcoming the whole sustainability world right here to our city. I hope some of you have gotten a chance to get out and be on the lake, be on the river. It's always like this in Chicago. It's always 78 degrees and totally sunny. So after we're done here with this terrific keynote and panel, we can go outside later after the reception. But I'm so happy to see you all. Okay. So, I know already today you've had the chance to hear a weather report from Tom Skilling. You've had your hopes buoyed by the next generation of climate and sustainability leaders. Maybe you've caught panels about Great Lakes restoration or the future of quantum computing and what it has to do with our water and energy. But I'm just really excited to have you all here today to hear from someone who's been thinking so deeply about the water and energy connections in our world and what it means to power our future. So Jeremy Rifkin is going to be with us to explore this critical intersection of innovation and impact. He's a renowned economic philosopher. He's president of TIR Consulting Group. And his talk today is called Powering a Sustainable Future, the Dual Imperative of Water and Energy Transitions. Dual imperative. We're going to be following that up with a panel that really deeply considers these energy-water intersections and think boldly about the systems that are going to shape our world and how we can work together to transform them. So, before Jeremy takes the screen, I just want you to know if you've got a question for him or for our panelists, scan the QR code on the screen to submit your question, and we will take as many of them as we can throughout the course of the discussion. At the speaker's request, I would also ask that you kindly silence all of your noise-making devices and anything else unless you're using them specifically for translation. It's an invitation for all of you to be fully present in this very special plenary conversation, to listen, to be inspired, to reflect and engage with the ideas ahead. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming to the screen Jeremy Rifkin, joining us virtually for this session today.
Molecules into the clouds and wild, extreme water events. These atmospheric rivers in the winter spewing snow in places that never had snow, 15 feet in Southern California, unheard of. Then in the spring, we're getting flooding across every ecosystem on every continent, month after month underwater. Infrastructures destroyed, our fellow creatures' lives taken, and our own human lives. And in the summer, there's no water. Drought, month after month after month, literally no water. for agriculture, for human consumption, for industry. And then come the heat waves, 100 degrees, 110, 125 degrees Fahrenheit. People are dying around the world. And then the wildfires on every continent. And they're just destroying the entire infrastructure of the last 2 centuries. In the fall, we get the hurricanes and typhoons. So what's happening is we've got 8 billion human beings in our family, and everyone's scared to death, either in denial, or they don't want to talk about it, or if they're young, they don't even know if they want to have children and carry on this experiment on the planet. Our scientists tell us we're in the 6th extinction of life on this planet, and it doesn't even make the news. We've had 5 mass extinction events over history. They came quick, wipe out. And now our scientists say we could lose half of the species on this planet in the lifetime of today's babies. These are species that have been here for millions of years. We'll never see them or hear them again. So what do? We have to realize that this just didn't come overnight. There's a long history of why this has happened. For most of the time that we lived on this planet, 300,000 years, we did what every other species did. We adapted moment to moment to the hydrosphere, the waters, understanding it's the life source, all right? And so 6,000 years ago, something changed. The last ice age had receded, the Pleistocene, around 11,000 years ago. The Holocene came in, nice, warm climate. We moved from nomadic life to sedentary life, agriculture, pastoralization, and then it came, the great urban hydraulic civilizations, 6,000 years ago. It began in Mesopotamia. They were very successful in growing grain, so successful that more babies were being born. And at some point, too many children and not enough food. So this is where the experiment began. In order to bring more food to the rising urban civilization, they began to sequester the waters, the dams, the dikes, the levees, the reservoirs. And instead of seeing it as a life source, they began to see it as a resource. And this began to happen at the same time all over the world. The rivers of the Indus Valley of India, urban hydraulic civilizations. The Yellow River and Yangtze River in China, urban hydraulic civilizations. Crete, ancient Greece, and of course the Roman Empire. Over 3 continents, aqueducts. More recently, we had the Mayan civilization in Mexico and Central America, urban hydraulic civilization, and then the Inca civilization in South America. This process has gone on for 6,000 years, and every time these urban hydraulic civilizations emerged, for a time they prospered, and then they all collapsed with a huge entropy bill on the planet. And now it's all culminating in the 20th and 21st century with the great hydroelectric power dams and artificial reservoirs, starting with Hoover Dam and American Lake Mead. And as you know, Lake Mead is drying up. The rivers, Colorado River is drying up, and the whole western part of the country is wondering, do we have any water left? And it's also moving around the world, 3 gorges in China, everywhere, literally. But where do we go from here? How do we begin to understand this? We don't have a playbook. The problem is the playbook we're using to try to address this crisis of 6,000 years is what created the crisis. It's the way we relate to nature. It's how we organize science. It's how we govern society. It's how we create economic systems. It's how we orient ourselves in time and space. It's an endless list. So we're using the same playbook, which culminated in the Enlightenment, the Industrial Revolution, the Age of Progress, to try to address the crisis. Even our global governing institutions are doing that. The UN, the World Bank, OECD, IMF, good institutions. I marvel at what they're able to do, et cetera, but we need a new playbook. So let me share a story with you. Back in 2001, Romano Prati came to Washington for a visit with me as a friend at the embassy. He was at that time the president of the head of the European Commission, formerly Prime Minister of Italy. And he said, look, Jeremy, you spent 25 years here in America. It's not moving forward. We've got to address this issue, and Europe's ready to move. Come and work with us, which I took him up on it. A lot of long distance traveling back and forth. And the first thing we did was pretty interesting, which I want to share with all of you because you folks are on the front line of all of this and know a lot more about it than we do. So the first question we ask is, how did the great paradigm shifts in human history occur? Anthropologically. If we know how they occur, maybe we're going to get a roadmap here and a new playbook for the future for eons to come. When we look back at history, we found something quite unusual and interesting. That all the great paradigm shifts in how our human family lived and thrived, they all had a common denominator. That at a moment of time, 5 defining technologies emerged kind of serendipitously. They weren't put together by government, and they emerged and converged to create an infrastructure that fundamentally changed the way we manage our day-to-day life. What are those 5 technology revolutions that come together occasionally in history? Number 1, new communication revolutions. Number 2, new energy regimes. Number 3, new modes of mobility and logistics. Number 4, new ways to manage water, and water is the key to the other 3. And number 5, new approaches to habitats for living. And if this sounds kind of not rocket science, all of you took high school biology, right? So you learn that every organism alive on this planet has to have 5 things to survive. Number 1, it has to communicate, even plants. Number 2, it has to have some source of energy thermodynamically to thrive. Number 3, it has to have mobility and motility, even plants. Number 4, it has to have some source of water for it to be able to live on this planet. And number 5, it has to have a semi-permeable membrane, a habitat which separates the inside of its organism, but keeps them in aligned with the rhythms of nature on the other side. So let me give you a couple of quick examples. First industrial revolution in the 19th century, the Brits. So the Brits' communication revolution was steam power printing, no more manual print presses. Then they laid out a telegraph system in the last half of that century, instant communication across the British Isles. So the energy revolution, they had depleted the forest. There was no more available trees for firewood. So they dug under the ground, went into the Carboniferous burial ground of 350 million years ago, and dug up the remains of plant and animal life that had morphed into coal, oil, and gas, and they took up the coal. That was the energy revolution. The mobility revolution, they put the steam engine on rails, locomotives, 60 miles an hour. It changed everything. This took them to national markets. It took them to shareholding companies and very centralized infrastructure, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. And it took them to urban habitats. That was their habitats. So let me talk about the second industrial revolution briefly. 20th century, the US. The communication revolution, Alexander Graham Bell. Telephone, across the continent, instant communication. The energy revolution, we struck oil in Texas. We didn't need coal. The mobility revolution, we put out the automobile. And the water revolution, the great hydroelectric power dams. So that took us to globalization, global markets, and all of that, and global governing institutions and geopolitics, all of that collapsed in 2008 July. In that month, oil hit $147 a barrel on world markets. The whole economy shut down. That was the great earthquake of the first and second industrial revolutions. The financial collapse of subprime mortgages 60 days later, that was a little thing. Why was it the end? Everything depends on fossil fuels. It's not just heating our home and powering our automobile, pharmaceutical products, synthetic fiber, cosmetics. It's an endless list. So when oil goes over $80 a barrel, watch inflation go up and watch the economy shut down. This is in the last stages of a global geopolitical world, and we're seeing it fought off now with tariff wars and everywhere. All right. So we are on the cusp of a third industrial revolution. It's quite interesting. The communication revolution, and this is not theory, everything here is just beginning to scale. The communication revolution is the internet. We have 4.5 billion people who have a little cell phone in their hand or a screen, but let's take a cell phone. And those 4.5 billion people with that cell phone can send communications instantly at near zero marginal cost to anyone they like in the world. All right? It's all distributed. I want you to keep that word distributed in mind as you think about ecosystem. It's all distributed. All right? And that's the communication revolution. The energy revolution, solar and wind. We now have millions and millions of players doing solar and wind. I work with the European Parliament and Commission on the 2020-20 formula. Millions and millions and millions of people are harnessing sun and wind where they are. Then the excess or surplus they're sharing on high voltage current lines now across regions, in 10 years across continents, and 20 years under the oceans and across time zones, all distributed. That's solar and wind and soon green hydrogen and others. The mobility revolution, we have millions of electric vehicles out there today, and pretty soon hydrogen fuel cell trucking. And those electric vehicles can send electricity back to the grid. It's a distributed mobility revolution. They can send it back to the grid. And they're becoming increasingly autonomous. The taxis in San Francisco are now autonomous. And so they're using big data and analytics from the communication internet and solar and wind from the energy internet to manage the transportation internet. And they're now all combining, if you know, with the water internet. We're not running out of water. We're so confused. And that is, everyone says droughts, or is it floods, or is it floods, or it's droughts. Well, it's both. Water molecules, as you know in this group today, they don't disappear. They've been here for billions of years, but they're changing when they come down, where, and in what volume, because of floods, droughts, heat waves, wildfires, hurricanes, etc. Now we're going to put in millions of water microgrids, all distributed. Already, the FAO, I love the FAO, the UN, one of my favorite institutions. They're working in the Sahel with women, preparing them to put up water microgrids to collect the water when it comes down, instead of letting it wash away, putting it underground and then distribute it when you need it. In my country, water microgrids, very high tech, are coming in. There will be thousands now and millions of water microgrids all over North America and Europe and the world in the next 20 years. Collect the water. Even the gray water is recycled, and soon the black water overnight. And California's already legislated that for the larger hotels and buildings, all distributed. What does this tell us? We are moving from globalization to glocalization, and from geopolitics to bioregional governance. Let me explain what I mean by this. The first and second industrial revolutions based on fossil fuels were vertically integrated, and you ended up with, because they were centralized fossil fuels and required huge amounts of money to protect and secure them in military, and all the other industries had to be centralized. So at the end of the line, we got 500 global companies. I know them well. I taught the advanced management program at the Wharton School. I was a student there in the 60s, but I came back and taught the advanced management program for 15 years. We brought in CEOs for 5 weeks, and they're nice folks, et cetera, and some of them are in our global team. But here's the problem. Those 500 global companies based on centralized fossil fuels, they represent a third of the GDP in the world. They only have 65 million workers out of a global workforce of 3.5 billion people. And the 8 richest individuals on that pyramid, their wealth equals almost the wealth of half the human beings living on the planet. It was that way regardless of whether it was in the United States or the Soviet Union or whatever. It was the nature of the fuels and the energy. We are now in a big change. So here's what's happening. It has a lot to do with bioregional governance. The reason I say we're moving to bioregional governance is climate events don't give a crap about political boundaries. They affect ecosystems, floods, droughts, heat waves, and wildfires. So what's happening is nation states and municipalities and regions, by pragmatism, are crossing political boundaries to share common ecosystems and begin to steward them as commons, life source, not a resource. This is the one place America's ahead. Europe's ahead and China on the others, but here's one place we're ahead. We have 2 great bioregions. We have the Cascadia bioregion, Washington, Montana, Idaho, et cetera, British Columbia, Manitoba. They share a common Cascadian bioregion, and they steward it as an ecosystem. You can't abuse it and exploit it like the Oral Sea that disappeared in 40 years. We have a second bioregional governance, the Great Lakes. Those 5 lakes, we have 8 US governors, 2 Canadian premiers. they share it as a common ecosystem. You can't exploit it. It's a life source, not a resource. And guess what? Those 5 Great Lakes are 20% of all the remaining fresh water on the whole planet. All right. We have in China, I work with, we have 8 bioregions, ecoregions that have now been established. In Europe, we only have 1, unfortunately. This is the one place we're behind. It's France and Spain. It's the Pyrenees, the Balearic Islands, Occitania, and Catalonia. But I'll assure you, I'm pushing and pressing in this new commission this year. I'm a big fan of the European Commission. We're going to have to get there and have bioregions across the European Union for sure. So let me explain the difference. So the first and second industrial revolutions that were centralized and vertically integrated, they relied on what we call subtractive manufacturing. You take a huge hunk of nature's resources brought to us by net primary production and photosynthesis, and then you shave a lot of them off to get your final product. You're building a house, so you don't use all the glass or all the cement, or you're building a car, putting a car together. A lot of it's lost, all right? It's subtractive manufacturing. Now we're seeing a third industrial revolution. It's additive manufacturing. It's 3D printing. It's AI driven, and it favors high-tech SMEs. What is it? With additive manufacturing, I'll give you an example. Let's say you're an architect and you want to build a house. So I'll give you an example. Cucinelli is a good Italian architect. He uses clay as his feedstock. You don't want to use cement, too much CO2. But you can use fiber, and you can use sand and glass and waste products, but he used clay. They use clay to build houses for thousands of years. So the robot 3D printer, instructs the clay to heat up, and then layer by layer, you build out an entire building. You can do a machine. You can do anything. This is not overnight. Airbus is now doing it, and SAP, the largest company in Europe, is doing it. And Siemens is doing it that I've worked with. And in our country, General Electric is doing it. But mainly, it's university kids all over the world that are doing 3D printing, additive manufacturing in labs, fab labs. They're getting ready for this. So what's the deal here? So Cucinella, the architect, can take the building that he built, that did the software for, and at 30 seconds on his cell phone, at near zero marginal cost, he can send the instructions for that building, the software, to an architect in the Philippines. She can print out as many buildings as she likes and pay a license fee. This takes us from seller-buyer markets to provider-user networks. It's a new system, and it's totally distributed. And there's no tariffs. There's no tariffs on software. There's no tariffs. So we're going to begin to see this distributed revolution moving very quickly all over the world. Where we're going to see it mostly is with edge data centers, all distributed. The problem is these big centralized data centers, they can't handle the data. There's too much data. You have an automobile that's semi-autonomous about to crash. You send that data back to a big remote data center, it might be quick in your mind, too slow. There are now thousands and pretty soon millions of edge data centers. They're all distributed. So you can be right at the point where you need to be quickly so that automobile doesn't crash. We're beginning to see this transformation around the world. And what we're going to see is a much greater distribution of power because everyone's the infrastructure here. If you have solar and wind, you're the infrastructure. If you have an electric vehicle, you're the infrastructure. Edge data centers, you're an infrastructure. Telecommunication with a cell phone, you're the infrastructure. This is a real revolution. And what's happening is it's changing everything. For example, the military. We needed huge militaries to secure the first and second industrial revolution, fossil fuels. Fought a lot of wars about fossil fuels. Millions of people have died in these wars. Now the great military think tanks, I mentioned this in my new book, Planet Aqua, they've come out with all their studies in the last 2 years, and they're saying the military was kind of starting to move from securing peace through wars to managing and working with local ecosystems because of the floods, the droughts, the heat waves, and wildfires. They have to come in and help out. This is happening in America. We have tens of thousands of National Guard who have to show up at these ecosystems because the more important role is to prepare, rescue, and restore. These are very, very big changes going on. Where does this take us? Let me talk about water, food, energy nexus, because you're going to discuss this. All right. So this is going to be very interesting to you. A study was done, we have in the Planet Aqua book, on thermoelectric power plants. We have 12,000 major thermoelectric power plants that generate electricity. So you use uranium, coal, oil, or natural gas to heat up the water that creates the electricity that you need for the turbine. So again, uranium, coal, oil, or gas heats up the water. The water creates the steam runs the electric turbine. And then you have to cool off those turbines. But the problem is, for example, in southern France in the summer, the water in the ecosystem is so warm that they have to close down their thermoelectric power plants because there isn't cold water. This study showed that if you use solar and wind, which is far cheaper than those other energies, you use solar and wind to generate the electricity, you eliminate 95% of all the water used right now. I hope you all got that one. And why are we not moving that way? Old ways of thinking, industries that don't want to move forward, etc. But where does this take us? We need to have a blue deal to go with the Green Deal. I wrote the book, The Green Deal, New Green Deal. I work with the European Union. I'm in favor of it. We need the Green Deal to be stronger now in the European Union because we're at 1.5 degrees Celsius. If we hit 2, we're in real big trouble. So we need to understand that we've got to get off fossil fuels really quickly. And a lot of you are here today because that's what you do. You're the front line. You're the ones that are actually moving this new idea forward. But we need a blue deal too, because the floods, the droughts, the heat waves, and the wildfires are forcing us to rethink how we relate to the water planet in all of our infrastructure, communication, energy, mobility, all of that, and has to be rethought. We're not going to be able to control the hydrosphere. It's clear. The hydrosphere is going to determine the new ecosystems. It's going to determine the migration of plant and animal life. It's going to determine where we live and how much we're sedentary versus movement around the planet. This is the truth. And this is what we need to come to grips with. One of the things that is interesting about the Blue Deal is when I was writing this book, Planet Aqua, I didn't share this with anybody except one person at the tippy top of the European Commission. You can guess who that might be. But independent of me, the Economic and Social Committee of Europe, which represents all the industries and trade associations, were calling for a Blue Deal. Then the Committee of the Regions. And now our team is in the European Parliament working with all the political parties to move toward a Blue Deal resolution. And we're seeing this develop very, very quickly. So the issue now is time is running, and we need a Blue Deal with a Green Deal in order to rethink how we create a new infrastructure where the hydrosphere calls the shots, and we learn to adapt rather than exploit. We treat it as a life source and not a resource. One of the things that's heartening to me, very heartening actually, is when this third industrial revolution infrastructure came in, we didn't see it all at the beginning. First, there was the communication internet, and then a little bit later, the energy internet with solar and wind. A little later, the electric vehicles, and then after that came the water microgrids and the 3D printing, et cetera. And what we're seeing now is a big change in how we deal with economic life. We're shifting from capitalism to hydroism. It's all the water. The only capital that exists is not intellectual property rights and what you have in your inventory. The only capital that exists, as you know better than any of us, is net primary production and photosynthesis. But we're less than 1% of the biomass, our species. We're using 23% of the net primary production and 40% in 20 years. Not viable for us or anyone else. We're seeing a younger generation that's pivoting from growth to flourishing. There is no such thing as growth in nature. That is an economic term. Nature either flourishes or it doesn't. We talk about productivity in economics. That doesn't exist in nature. Regenerativity is what nature's about. We talk about efficiency. Nature's not efficient, it's redundant so that it can withstand and move with changes in the ecosystems they're in. We talk about finance capital, but the real capital is ecological capital for sure. GDP is a ridiculous medium. You build a nuclear power plant, you build a prison, you clean up a waste dump, and that's considered GDP. We need quality of life indicators. Did the child when he was born survive and flourish? Did they get enough schooling? Were they able to have a good quality of life, etc.? It could go on, but these are good things that are emerging. The problem is we're too much in the weeds, if I should say. We need to continue on ecosystem evolution, and you're the front line and explaining how to do this and bringing in a whole generation of citizen scientists. You're the front line, for sure. But it's important that through our schooling system, we begin to take a new look at this planet and how we learn to thrive in it in new ways. So let me go to another entirely different perspective here on some things that we need to talk about. I want to talk to you about three very interesting things that are going on that are going to give you some heart. That we may be seeing a fundamental shift, I believe, in the next 3 generations. Now I'm sitting here looking out my window. And right there to the left on the high-tech Bethesda corridor is the National Institute of Health. They have a new project, which has now moved to Europe and Asia. It changes the entire way we learn to live on this planet. It's called the Human Microbiome Project. It's now in Europe, it's now in Asia. And what they're telling us, these scientists, is that every single person in this room today, every single one, is an ecosystem, not a metaphor. Our skeleton is replaced every 10 years, our kidney every year, our stomach cells every month. Water molecules are coming in. 60% of the body is water, managing the electromagnetic fields and the circadian rhythms. Then the molecules go somewhere else. The phosphorus in my tooth came from a mountain, degraded by the waters into sediment. Then that little phosphorus went into plants and animals, came into my tooth, going somewhere else. So we are ecosystems within ecosystems. And here's where it gets really interesting. We're not alone in our bodies. There are millions of other creatures in this ecosystem in our bodies. There are protists and archaea and fungi and viruses. Only 20,000 human genes in our bodies. There are millions of other genes in that body. Only 44% of the cells are human in the human body. The rest belong to these other creatures. Amazing how this is going to change everything, because what happens in your first biology class, the teacher says to you, everyone in this room is an ecosystem within ecosystems, continually taking parts of the world into its body and then going somewhere else. Wouldn't that change the entire paradigm? We live on a water planet, and water is the primary agent that allows us to have the lithosphere, the atmosphere, the biosphere. Primary, no water, no life. Then it comes, so I think that's going to be a real eye-opener for the next generation. I also want to share a study with you the Smithsonian did. It's pretty interesting. They asked, how did human beings survive? The last mammalian species that we know are pretty weak, pretty small. And they went back in the geological record to when hominids emerged about 800,000 years ago, then Neanderthals 350,000 years ago, then Homo sapiens 300,000 years ago. And they realized that during that period, geologically, was some of the greatest climate changes in history, because the planet tilted. It tilts every once in a while for lots of reasons. Right now, it's tilting because of the redistribution of the waters, all right? But it tilted, and it gave into a cycle of 100,000 years ice age, 10,000 global warming. 100,000 ice age, 10,000 global warming. 8 cycles, the last one being the Pleistocene. Now the Holocene is here. We're not going back to ice age because the heating of the planet is here. What they're saying is, well, how did we survive all this species? Because we're the most adaptive species on the planet, I suspect, maybe with the exception of viruses and bacteria. And why are we that? Big brain, language, can share knowledge across generations. Our other creatures can share knowledge with their offspring, but we're really good at it. Number 2, opposable thumb and fingers. We are great tool makers. The beavers are good, but we've got opposable thumb and fingers. Number 3, we have mirror neurons, empathy neurons in our neural circuitry, not up here, throughout the body, that can actually experience a human being or another creature, their grief, their joy, whatever it is, as if we're experiencing it in our bodies. This allows us to be a collective species. Now, there are times when empathy inflates, usually when urban hydraulic civilizations grow, and then when they collapse from the entropy bill, people start killing each other off. That's what's happening now. We've got to change that. And I think we have to look to our young people, the Gen Zs. When they went out on the streets calling for a climate emergency, millions of them, what happened is this wasn't like other protests. This is the first time an entire generation came out on the streets. They saw themselves as an endangered species. They saw their fellow creatures as part of the family. That's biophilia. All the other divisions in history are our government loyalties, our religious ties, our blood ties, they're all still here. But this is an amazing change to see oneself as an endangered species. These are promising signs, all of these, that we can make the effort and we need to make the effort. Lastly, how do we make a shift from the age of progress to the age of resilience and learn that we live on a water planet with all the new solar and wind and other energies? We've got to rename this planet. I'm an elderly gentleman, and I'm saying to all of you younger people here that what we need to do is rename this planet with a second name. Keep the Earth, but that's based on a land planet and Western traditions. Eastern traditions are more water-oriented. But we rename the planet so that children grow up understanding what planet we live on. And that means that we need to take our constitutions, our codes, our regulations and standards and have a second name in all of them. It just happened in Venice. I was there with them this week, Climate Week. The mayoral office introduced a resolution calling the oldest water city in the world the first Planet Aqua City. And now it's moving around the world already in the last few weeks. But that's important because then when mommy and daddy are facing their little 5-year-old and the 5-year-old says, where do we live? What is this place we live on? Mommy and daddy can say, sweetie, you live on a water planet, Planet Aqua, very unique, where life exists, maybe the only place in the universe. Be proud of this. Make sure this experiment in history continues way into the future. Last thoughts. I was surprised in my lifetime to see this, but it began in some of the Andean countries, Central America, spread to Quebec and Australia, New Zealand, where they're giving rights to waters. Corporations have been given rights legally for a century in my country. Certainly water deserves rights since it animates all of life. And what they're doing is they're giving rights to them legally, and they have guardians that go into court on their behalf to make sure they can run free. They're going to run free anyway. But we have to make sure that we adapt to the waters rather than adapting the waters to us. That's the key. This is an amazing experiment in the universe. We still don't know. There's water in other planets. But what we don't know is how did it happen that at a certain moment in this planet, at a certain moment, a cell emerged from those chemical elements. And from there, from unicellular to multicellular to us. What was it? Were we just close enough, just far enough from the sun? What was there in terms of the electromagnetic fields coming into the planet, going out of the planet? We just don't know. But we've been looking for life all over the universe, and we're always looking for water first. But it may be not just water. It may be the unique circumstances that created this incredible thing called life. Final thought. We can do this, but this is really going to be tough. And it's going to depend on the next 3 generations, the alphas, the betas, the Gen Zs, the alphas, and the betas. They have to do this. And it requires that we move to a more bioregional, localized, distributed worldview, that we use the AI and 3D printing in order to be able to steward local ecosystems as commons rather than as exploited resources. If we don't do this, we're lost. And what I would say to you, all of you are the ones on the front lines. You're out there in the ecosystems. You know the dangers. You know the opportunities for regeneration and for adaptation and for rethinking all of this. But to go along with this, share your thoughts in terms of the worldview that we have on a Planet Aqua home in the universe. Share the paradigm, because that's the way that's going to move this into a new journey in history. It can be done, And I take off my hat, if I had one, to everyone in this room. You're doing the tough work. You're out there in the ecosystems. But I would like to see a whole generation of citizen scientists, so that their service, starting in middle school and high school, is out in the ecosystems learning from you, understanding that the most precious thing is what's alive. The screen, thinking that the screen is awesome is ridiculous. What's alive brings in awe and wonder and imagination and transcendence. And we know that when young children are in what we call these forest schools in Germany and other places, and they're out in nature, when they're second, 2-year-old, 3-year-old, 4-year-old, 5-year-old, they come together more mindfully. They understand the planet they live in, and they are able to come to the fore and be a leadership for this new generation. So I was privileged to be with you today. Thank you so much for all of the contribution you're making. Please, let's rename this planet Planet Aqua, and let's begin the process of learning how to live on this beautiful blue planet in the universe. So future generations, not just our creatures, future generations of all our fellow creatures have their moment to experience this wonder called life. Thank you.
All right. We may not tackle the tactics of the rebrand on Planet Earth to Planet Aqua, but I know everybody here is behind the spirit. Thank you so much to Jeremy for that powerful and very thought-provoking talk. Gave us a lot to think about, put a lot on the table, and we are going to dive deeper into this water-energy nexus, water-energy-food nexus, connectivity conversation with a very dynamic panel of leaders, all from right here in the state of Illinois, who are working every day at this intersection of policy, innovation, and community resilience. So please join me in welcoming our esteemed panelists to the stage, and don't forget to submit your questions also for us along the way. I'm going to take your questions through the panel. First up, we are so delighted to have with us today Congressman Bill Foster. He's a scientist and businessman who represents the 11th Congressional District of Illinois. We're very fortunate to have him representing us in Congress. Dr. Katie Huff, the former U.S. Assistant Secretary of Nuclear Energy and current Associate Professor at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. We're also joined by J.C. Kibbe, who's Climate Advisor for the state of Illinois. Colleen Wright, the Vice President of Strategy and Growth for Constellation. And finally, rounding it out, Katrina Fay, the Vice President for Clean Energy Production and Manufacturing for Intersect Illinois, our state's business attraction and economic development catalyst. Please, let's give them a warm welcome. They're going to join me up on stage, and we're going to get into it. Hi, everyone. Keep that thoughts on the Planet Aqua rebrand in your head. We might come to that at the end. I want to start with an opening question for everyone here. Jeremy rightly framed this whole transition we're in right now as the third industrial revolution. We're in this, it's a revolutionary moment. And I would like to get just a quick pulse from each of you on where are we in that revolution today? Where are we in the landscape? And how are we doing on progress? And what are some of the key measures of success that we should really kind of have in mind? So Congressman Foster, you've been working on this for some time. I'd love to start with you.
Sure. Well, I guess I left physics and went into this crazy business of politics about 17 years ago now. And at that time, there were aspirations of getting to maybe $1 a watt for solar panels and comparable numbers for and we just said, yeah, right. And now the spot price for Chinese solar panels today is 10 cents a watt. 10 cents a watt. And that really will force us to rethink really everything on there. And batteries are on a similar cost curve downward. And so that means that a lot of things that were hopelessly uneconomic are now thinkable. And it's going to be great for the world as a whole. And interestingly, China has just massively overproduced in capacity to build these things. So they're building all these solar panels actually at a loss, but distributing them around the whole rest of the world. So China's carbon emissions have likely peaked. and the rest of the developing world is going to decarbonize a lot faster than we thought. So that's one of the biggest, the reduction in costs of batteries and renewables generally, probably one of the biggest things. There are also some exciting other developments. I just had a meeting a couple days ago with a gentleman who has developed a conductor that allows these high voltage power transmission lines to carry 3 times more electricity by just replacing the conductors. And this will be revolutionary in terms of how we would deploy this in situations where we already have the right of way, which is true for areas like almost throughout Illinois. So
Right.
we'll not be limited by the capacity of our, with some additional investment, it's going to be that'll be a huge change. And then there are a number of things like the very exciting prospect of actually recycling waste nuclear fuel.
Yep.
We have just south of my district what's called the Morris operation, which is a place where back in the 1970s and 80s and 90s, Illinois got talked into accepting the spent nuclear fuel from everything from Connecticut, Yankee to San Onofre to places all over, and it's sitting down there south of Joliet. And in there, 95% of the energy value in that fuel is still there. And there are technologies under active development to actually find a way to extract that another 95%. And that would provide enough energy for Illinois for many, many decades, I think centuries.
That really resonates. As some of you know, we're working on a National Science Foundation Regional Innovation Engine here in the Great Lakes. It's all about recovering those resources, capturing the value. But I heard just a few points I want to drill down on. I mean, we're thinking about KPIs here. So cost per kilowatt hour, cost coming way down on solar panel production and other renewables, volume of transmission lines. I think volume of transmission is a really big key indicator we're looking at. And then capabilities around recycling and reuse. That's great. Anyone want to build on that landscape?
Well, I love that Congressman Foster started us off just talking about the incredible innovation that we're seeing in this space. So, we have incredible challenges ahead of us to transition to clean energy. We also have incredible challenges ahead of us to meet new demand. So we've got growing demand from data centers, some projections, doubling or tripling the existing demand from data centers, but there's an amazing amount of innovation happening in this space as well. So how do we transition from fossil fuels to clean energy, and then how do we scale up our clean energy to supply these new demands from both industry and innovation to the data economy. But we've got the best minds in the country on it, the best minds in the world, and an amazing opportunity.
Yeah, unless they're actually being fired at this, we see.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, the data center demand, of course, driving both demand for energy, but also water, both for the offsite generation and heating and cooling. So another great example of the water energy kind of resource connection here as we think about powering our future.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of bad press sometimes around data center demand for AI. People think about cat videos or other things, but there's an incredible value from AI for national security, but also for GDP growth. So there was recently an Electric Power Research Institute, EPRI, just released a study that assessed that there could be somewhere between I want to say it was up to $15 trillion of GDP value from AI, just the innovation that it enables and the opportunity that it enables for our economy.
Yep.
At the risk of stating the obvious, a key metric here is tons of carbon that we're putting into the atmosphere every year. If we're not doing that, whatever else we may be doing, we're not succeeding in fighting the climate crisis. So I think lowering the cost per kilowatt, really important. Using the energy that we have more efficiently, certainly important in the power sector in a lot of different contexts, including AI, thinking about how those can operate more efficiently and things like that, but also in other sectors that we haven't talked about as much, the building sector, the transportation sector, and I think that looks both like on the transportation side, electrifying the vehicle fleet, but also being smarter about what modes of transportation we're using, enabling more mode shift, mass transit, walking and biking, so on, redefining or redesigning our communities in a way that's more aligned with that. And then in the building sector, more efficiency and also shifting to electrification and more efficient ways of heating and cooling there. So when you think about the sectors that we need to get at if we're going to address climate change, power is the big one that we're a little further along on the curve, I think, that everybody talks about. But transportation, buildings, industry are really right behind that. And I think that we're where we are maybe 15 years ago in the power sector in some of those other sectors. So we've got to continue that progress.
Yeah, that's great. I'm glad you brought up the building sector, which is one we sometimes can forget about and is a huge consumer of water and power, both of those things. So, and we'll get into the heavy industry later, but thanks for bringing up tons of carbon, key metric. Yes.
I think, if you'd asked me 2 years ago what metric I was watching most closely, it would have been number of contracts signed to build new nuclear power plants. And great news, there's a whole bunch of new contracts that have been signed, investments from folks like Amazon and Constellation to sort of restart or build new nuclear power plants. And so I think I'm still watching that metric largely because I'm interested in seeing first-of-a-kind reactor technologies come down that cost curve and get to building nth of a kind. You can only do that with enough contracts on the books. But now that we have that book, contract inventory rising, I want to see those plants build on time and on budget, which is going to be a real challenge for the nuclear industry, to be quite frank. But it will result in the sort of lower dollars per megawatt hour eventually.
Great.
I would say from an economic development / business attraction lens, a metric that we're following is the types of projects that we're seeing. Looking at Illinois, the clean energy, just this last fiscal year, our clean energy projects made up the bulk volume of the projects that we were seeing. They were the highest number in our various industries that we're tracking. But overall, just last year, Illinois saw $2 billion in clean energy investment. So that in itself is clearly an indicator that there's momentum, there's movement, and traction. So with that momentum, just at the state's economic development arm and business attraction efforts, we've actually divided up our business development team to be sector specific. And that is where I'm sitting under the clean energy production and manufacturing arm of our business development team. So I think just looking at how the state has reorganized and is operating is just also another indicator that this is something to be looked at.
And another sector of interest of Illinois obviously has been quantum and AI, advanced computing. And just thinking about those intersections, if you weren't in the panel previous to this one where some of the leaders of the Illinois Quantum and Microelectronics Park were there, I think it really is important to come back to this idea of the GDP, the innovation and the growth that is driven by these very resource-intensive projects, but it's going to also hold the promise of the new materials discovery and deployment that is also really part of the solution. So another really interesting kind of nexus to unpack and untangle, and of course we want to do it as efficiently as we can, but definitely a big part of the sort of clean energy sustainable future here in Illinois. So that's great. All right, some great key metrics to start us off, helpful sense of the landscape. I think we want to keep the balance of the hope for the future and also recognize this is a really challenging moment for leadership on climate and sustainability. And I want to take another of Jeremy's points of departure here. The climate problems don't care about your political boundaries. You're all here because you have worked in and across sectors, but also levels of government. And it's going to take a sort of all of us approach to get this done. So at this moment where we have a lot of deep uncertainty at the federal level, where are some of the sources of hope and action at the local level to drive this? Where local action, and maybe states in particular, but state and local action can have some forward progress for us?
I might kick it off on that one, just to say we've been here before. We have had administrations in Washington before who were in denial about the climate crisis, who were in denial about the economic importance of clean energy, and who have done what they could to, unfortunately, try and slow that down. And just to say that here in the state of Illinois, we are full steam ahead. I think that's been a very clear message from Governor Pritzker. That's certainly something that's very clear to all of us who are working at the state level. We are also part of the U.S. Climate Alliance, which is an alliance of almost half the states in the U.S. and a significant percentage of the population and the GDP who are similarly committed to that. So when I talk about some of the policies that we're continuing to push on here in the state of Illinois, know that we are not the only ones who are doing this and that we are in very good company. We are organized, we are coordinated, and we are committed to climate action. So what that looks like practically, we have a renewable portfolio standard here where we are deploying new wind, solar energy every year. Energy efficiency, the lowest cost resource there is. We're continuing to invest hundreds of millions of dollars of that every year in the state of Illinois. We have had conversations recently in the legislature about creating an energy storage standard, about creating virtual power plants. These are also really low cost and quick to deploy, relatively speaking, energy resources. And all told, we are investing, I would say, more than $1 billion in clean energy every year in the state of Illinois, and again, many other states alongside us. We're also doing a lot of planning for our clean energy future. We have integrated distribution plans here that the Illinois Commerce Commission helps coordinate. So those are our utilities looking at what is the grid going to look like in 5 years, 10 years, what investments do we need to make to be prepared for that. The same thing on the transmission side, the renewable energy access plan to start to, as we discussed earlier, do what we can on the state level to do more planning on the transmission side. Now, these regional transmission organizations, PJM and to a lesser degree MISO, unfortunately have not been holding up their end of the deal, I think, the way that we would like them to. They've been too slow to encourage the rollout of transmission. They've been too slow to get new generation, especially clean energy, through the queue. And if we want to meet our climate goals, if we want to meet our economic development goals, we need to bring more clean energy through the queue more quickly. So we're doing what we can to push those, and we're also doing what we can on the planning side on the state level. But there's a lot of moving pieces here in the state that I think there's good reason for optimism about.
Great. I want to ask a follow-up question. So think about this, but I want to go to Colleen next. Think about how the state's measuring the ROI on that $1 billion a year that it's investing and how we're communicating that to the public, that is the taxpayer base thinking about this. So I know there's great answers to that. But Colleen, in the meantime, I want to pick up on this grid modernization challenge. How have you seen in Illinois that we're, tackling some of these modernization, transmission issues, and what are some of the bright spots?
Yeah, I think Illinois is really unique. Illinois is incredibly unique in part because of the nuclear power that we have in the state. Constellation operates 21 reactors. It makes us the largest operator and owner of nuclear power in the US. 6 of those reactors sit in the state of Illinois. It's an incredible amount of clean, firm power. As we talked about with the data economy growth, we need clean, firm power to be able to supply power to that growing economy. We also need that for industrial purposes. That firming nature of the generation is incredibly important as we think about the transition to a clean energy future. In Illinois, those 6 reactors provide a substantial amount of power to fuel economic development in the state. And it's one of the reasons why the Quantum Campus chose Illinois to come here. So it's a differentiator today, but it's also an area of growth. We can operate and relicense those plants. It's the cheapest actual way to extend and expand clean energy here in the US, and a really great opportunity for the state to continue to support the energy transition and economic development. Just for context, the LaSalle Clean Energy Center supplies as much power, about 50% of the power that Chicago consumes on a daily basis. So these plants are large and supply a large amount of the clean power that we currently consume in the state. So there's a ton of opportunity there. I'm very excited about what we can do in Illinois to support the expansion of this clean, firm generation, particularly in the new nuclear space. So Katie and I see eye to eye on that one, and we're tracking those metrics as well. Very excited about what we can do there.
Katie, can you speak to some of, I just want to go a little bit deeper. I know your key metric is how many of these are bringing online, but just talk a little bit more about how this fits into the mix and what some of the trade-offs are as we're considering the
absolutely
clean future.
The firming power of nuclear, Colleen mentioned really clearly. I think it's critical to assess, what does an energy system look like that provides reliable, clean power? And when you think about the energy system, and in fact many institutions have done calculations about this, the combination of renewables and nuclear can give you a more cost-effective energy system that also provides power 24/7, and especially when you have a constrained transmission environment, it can be the only way you get to 100% carbon-free energy, right? Unless you can, transmit all of that power, you are going to eventually be limited to the amount of capacity you can build in renewables and storage. And nuclear can really help with that in a transmission-constrained environment. Here in Illinois, Colleen mentioned there's 6 nuclear power plants, 11 reactors, producing about half of the power here in Illinois. And Illinois, importantly, is a very nuclear state. The first nuclear fission chain reaction happened right here in Chicago. The first human-generated nuclear fission chain reaction. And we had Dresden 1, which was the first privately funded commercial nuclear power plant right here in Illinois. All of these things sort of lead to a place where, Illinois has more nuclear power plants than any other state, more nuclear reactors. And that gives us a sort of position of leadership to sort of really lean into a model of how that energy system, a combination of renewables and nuclear and storage, can work. And I think, working with your representatives and local leadership on being a model for the country and, in fact, for the world for how growing that clean energy system can work is also really important. There's a lot of opportunity here in Illinois to leverage the expertise that we've grown over these many years towards that.
I think to the consumer, it can often be framed almost as a choice, though, and not part of a portfolio of options that power the system. So that seems to be one of the key, communication and understanding moments that we have. Because when framed as a trade-off, why not build more solar, right? But I think, again, the system view critical there. Congressman Foster, these are the grid modernization at scale that we need is going to take significant federal support and investment. I know it has been a challenging time, but from a local perspective, what do you think some of the bright spots are?
Well, I think there's a tremendous contribution to be made by the national labs here.
Yep.
That trying to understand exactly what the grid could look like, and there are technical components that have been developed at the national labs, and there are also a lot of the grid modeling is done in national labs as well. And just the question of for AI, the new data center AI load, that is something where there's a fair amount of freedom to reschedule it. These things spend part of their time training models, part of their time using inference, part of their time doing other stuff. And if you just look at the power draw from one of these, it's huge fluctuations that can be scheduled. And so that these are not just an absolute, a base sink of electricity. They're actually something that can contribute to grid stability if you get the scheduling going. And there's some really interesting work being done there. So I think that they could actually end up being good news for the amount of it's for variable resources. Another really interesting development is actually being pursued by the Gates, I think, at TerraPower, which is they're building a nuclear plant where the nuclear plant's running flat out all the time, heating up molten salt in a tank. And then they have on the back end of this, a variable number of turbines on the back end that can do load following, day-night load following or things like that. And so traditionally, nuclear has been sort of penalized by the big day-night cost differences in electricity, and now they can capitalize. Nuclear will be able to capitalize on the day-night cost difference by delivering the electricity when they get paid a lot for it. And so that's, things like that, I think, are going to be really transformative to the whole overall design of the grid.
Yeah. A lot to think about there. The unsung heroes, the national labs that we have in our state, I think it's always worth mentioning.
Well, I represent 2 of them, actually. I worked at Fermi National Lab for...
So I looked away from the iPad for what I thought was 2 minutes, and apparently there are 100,000 questions that have come in from the audience. So we're going to take a moment and bring one of those in. So I think this is appropriate on a global stage here. So while the US is ramping up nuclear power, why do we think Europe seems to be backing away? And I think this is really largely a conversation about global attitudes toward nuclear and how we play on that global stage and what the energy portfolio mix is globally.
It's an interesting question, and Katie can probably jump in on this better than I can, but I'll start. It's interesting perspective to say that the global stage has stepped away from nuclear, because in China, they're building more nuclear power plants than we've built
Yep.
I mean, I can't remember the latest stats on what they're building, but it's a huge ramp up.
Yep.
In Czech Republic, they're building new nuclear. They're building new nuclear in the UK. There was a period of time where people said, okay, we don't want any new nuclear, and they backed away from it. And now everybody's realizing that we cannot function on intermittent power if you want to grow an economy, and you need 24/7 firm power that nuclear uniquely provides. It's just a huge transformation. So I don't know, Katie, if you see anything different there.
Yeah, with great respect to the questioner, I will say Europe was, most of the nations in Europe were among the signatories of a pledge at the climate conference at COP28 to say, actually, we should be tripling nuclear power. The International Energy Agency has done these calculations associated with how much new nuclear power will we need to support a transition to clean energy to meet everyone's climate goals. And a lot of nations, including the United States and a lot of nations in Europe, all agree that you do need to about triple it in most nuclear states. So actually what we are seeing is a lot of intention to build new nuclear, even though sort of for a period shortly after Fukushima, a great deal of nuclear was shut down, especially in Germany. There's actually a great deal of new appetite in the rest of Europe. And in fact, yes, in China, it's at least 24 reactors that are under construction.
Mm-hmm. And then there's follow-up questions while we're sticking on this sort of nuclear point. I'm going to condense several that are really about the trade-offs, how confident we can be about security and then sort of environmental containment of waste and all of the things that we need to be doing to ensure that if nuclear remains a part of our energy portfolio, that the trade-offs are not, disaster and contamination.
Yeah, in the Biden administration, we had an approach that restarted a consent-based siting process that had been started in the Obama administration. My understanding is that consent-based process, it will be continued in this administration, but under a new name as a collaborative siting process. It's a process that's worked in other nations to find a location for spent nuclear fuel. And in our case, the main goal is to look for a location for interim storage to sort of consolidate the spent nuclear fuel to a sort of single or a couple of locations that are federally managed. This could conceivably help with a transition to recycling that spent nuclear fuel, which may very well be, the responsibility of the federal government, or at very minimum, its oversight responsibility. So I think it's a very hopeful process, and it has a promise to start at the grassroots and find consent. But I wonder if maybe others want to comment on that.
Yeah, I think nuclear fuel and spent nuclear fuel gets a lot of conversation. All of the spent nuclear fuel in the United States, I think the stat would fit in a super Walmart. And these nuclear reactors are running longer than my lifetime. And, we see wind and solar with no kind of waste management associated with the, spent fuel of those resources. So, nuclear is one of the safest generation plants in the country. In the US, we have incredible, procedures and policies around the operations and management. Constellation's one of the most, premier operators of nuclear power plants in the country. And you would get more radiation exposure from eating a banana than you would living near one of our nuclear plants for a year. So, incredibly safe.
Yeah. Unless anyone else wants to comment related, since you brought this up, there's a question about the waste and lack of reuse in renewables. For example, wind turbine blades that get buried in landfills, solar panels that are degrading, critical minerals that are lost. I know battery recycling at Argonne and some of our other national labs is a huge kind of critical materials priority. But what other sort of bright spots or points of hope do we have on these material challenges that are actually part of our entire energy portfolio, not just about nuclear waste disposal?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that I was really intrigued by is iron nitride magnets, which actually have a higher energy density than all of these rare earth magnets that China is strangling us over right now. And these, for a long time, these have been a theoretical possibility, but there is a factory in Minnesota actually in volume production of these magnets. And these things are, the waste is iron and nitrogen. And so you can throw them in the landfill when you're done with them, and it's just fine. And so that sort of breakthrough is, I think, going to make a big difference. When we decide what products to build at scale, look at the whole life cycle and choose the ones that are less painful at the end.
Yeah. that system engineering thinking about the circularity and the life cycle of objects is not something we've historically done particularly well. We have a lot of work to do there, and it's, again, another exciting reason that I'm certainly excited about the National Science Foundation's investments in that arena and hope we can have much more state and local leadership on that as well. All right, I'm going to come all the way back where we left you, JC, thinking about how we communicate to the public the value of these investments in renewables and the clean energy transition, because that's certainly, while relevant here in Illinois, is across the board for anyone thinking about making the case locally.
Yes, it can be a hard thing to talk about in the abstract, especially if you're, thinking about how do you pay your rent and working a job and raising a kid. And so obviously, we're talking about the climate crisis, and I would be remiss if I didn't say that one big thing is that my daughter will have a world to grow up in. But I also think, or yours, but I also think we should talk about the jobs that are coming from the clean energy economy. There's 130,000 jobs in the state of Illinois that are supported by clean energy. And that's a big part of it. These are good paying jobs, many of them union jobs, family sustaining jobs, and it's been a big bright spot, including in some counties in Illinois that have not seen a lot of economic growth from other opportunities. So I think that's one big piece. Reduce pollution, which is not just an abstraction. It means people in your family are healthier. It means less strain on our hospitals. It means you live longer and have a better quality of life. Lower bills. Clean energy, we know, and energy efficiency pushes down the cost of electricity and electric bills, so you're paying less on your bill every month. Energy efficiency saves $2 or $3 per every dollar that we spend on it, so we know that's a really good investment, and there's been similar sort of cost-benefit analysis done on our clean energy portfolio and some proposed storage standards and things like that. So all this is very thoroughly cost-benefit vetted. Transmission, an incredible return on investment and an incredible job creator. So as we ramp that up, hope to see more of the same on there. So clean energy, besides the climate, even if you didn't care about that, it's a lot of jobs. It's going to lower your bills and have more money in your pocket, and it's going to keep you and your community healthier.
Healthier. Yeah, that's right. Well, we'll come back to this jobs. You mentioned 130,000 in energy in Illinois, and I know there's north of 70,000 that are in some way involved with managing our water and wastewater systems. And growing, right? Growing all the time. So big opportunities there. Okay, we're going to take a shift a little bit. Our next section, I want to think about the really hard to decarbonize sectors that we don't often talk about, and the role of some of these other fuel mixes and energy sources in decarbonizing them. So just to set the stage for everybody, we're talking about the very large scale, super energy intensive manufacturing, raw materials processing that we all depend on, whether we like it or not. Steel production, cement manufacturing, this comes to the buildings point, right? Chemical production and refining, glass, ceramics, pulp and paper. These are the building blocks of all of our everyday lives. And that's true for us here, it's true around the world. They all take a lot of energy and require continuous operations, and they're responsible for a ton of our carbon emissions. So I want to talk about hydrogen first, since we've not brought that into the mix, and it's very nicely at the intersection of energy and water. This has been touted as one of the most promising paths to decarbonizing some of our very heavy industry, but it's gotten a little bit of it's taken a back seat for the moment. Colleen, do you want to talk a little bit about the trade-offs we're experiencing in the sort of hydrogen conversation?
Sure, yeah. Hydrogen is like this magic fuel that can decarbonize so many different sectors in many different ways. And it's so simple. We can produce hydrogen by splitting water into hydrogen and oxygen, and very simple, right? Like easy to explain, easy to do, but actually incredibly challenging. So 98% of the hydrogen today is produced through steam methane reforming. So converting our current hydrogen production to clean hydrogen production requires us to take our clean power and water and produce new clean hydrogen sources as one path. There are other paths to create clean hydrogen, and then be able to change our processes on the back end to decarbonize those hard to decarbonize sectors like steel production. Heavy duty transportation is a great sector for decarbonization. Constellation has a pilot project up at our 9 Mile Point power plant in upstate New York. It's a little over a megawatt deployment of a hydrogen electrolyzer where we produce hydrogen. Our current nuclear fleet produces or consumes hydrogen. So the pilot project is producing hydrogen at the plant and consuming hydrogen at the plant. So not for other end uses, but the big challenge with hydrogen transformation is the cost of hydrogen. So current steam methane reforming hydrogen is around $1 per kilogram. When you look at producing hydrogen from clean fuels, you're looking at a higher premium. So here in the US, there was a broad effort to try to reduce the cost of hydrogen production through a production tax credit. There were some challenges getting that across the finish line at a federal level, led to some uncertainty in the market. At the same time, we had the introduction of the hydrogen hubs here in the Midwest. We won one of those hydrogen hubs. It was an incredible win for the state, called MACH2, or the Midwest Hydrogen Hub here. We had many partners. Current was one of them, University of Illinois, and others as well. We're going to decarbonize a bunch of different sectors and invest, a lot in that industrial transformation. There's some uncertainty there, just given political changes going on right now, and how that plays out is, again, one of those, I don't know, it's a challenge with the hype cycles around these technologies. So when we see a hype cycle come up, we see lots of investment go into that technology, lots of time, effort, money. If that doesn't come to fruition, that time, effort, and money goes somewhere else. And so we've seen that flow through with hydrogen. We're on a down cycle for that right now, and would love to see that transformation happen, but it's not without its challenges.
Right. Well, and one of the places that the federal government plays a really important role here is in either providing those incentives or clear regulatory line of sight, something that allows us to have it go from hype cycle to something that's a little more stable and forward-looking. So, Congressman Foster, I don't know if you'd want to weigh in on.
The key thing is the $1 a kilogram for hydrogen.
Yeah.
Because if that is the case, there are just a long list of things that you can decarbonize economically, right? And so the question is, how is that going to happen? And one of the unexplored avenues, or only partly explored avenues, is direct thermochemical production of hydrogen. It's a remarkable fact that if you look at advanced nuclear, if you look at fusion, even in the future, most of it shows up as process heat at 750 degrees C, roughly. And if you have process heat at 750 degrees C, there are things, they go by the name of the sulfur iodide cycle, if I'm remembering my elements properly. Yes, I'm getting a nod there. That essentially allow you to put water in one end, and then in a continuous recycling process, split streams of hydrogen and oxygen out the other one, with the input of process heat. And so this would allow you to get to $1 a kilogram, and with a very simple, low capex, low investment operation. And so this I think would really be transformative. And it also provides you a way of sort of leveling the load and distributing it. You can, for example, you take all of the spent fuel at Morris, Illinois, and in some sense it has too much energy there. Illinois could go for centuries on the spent fuel sitting there. But if we convert it to hydrogen there in a set of nuclear reactors, we could then pipe hydrogen all over the Midwest and decarbonize, steel in Detroit or wherever it happens to be. And that would be just a tremendous base for the economy and a way to actually use this tremendous sort of unspent resource of the spent nuclear fuel.
But at some cost to creating these transmission lines to do it all the infrastructure, right, that would be needed.
Yeah, well, the piping, once you have the hydrogen, piping around is fairly cost effective.
So where do you think, given our current landscape, where would you put this in the future kind of mix of our
Well, I think that these are both in R&D phase.
Yep.
But that's, one of the things that we have to fight for, at the top of our priorities is not to destroy R&D in this country.
Yes.
This is the biggest fight and probably the most important fight that we have going in our country. If you look 30 years from now, whether we win or lose in our efforts to preserve research and development and our scientific dominance that we currently have, or whether it'll be destroyed, that will be the fight that people will look back and say, we won that or we lost that in a very important time.
I think that's right, and I think it's worth pausing on that for a moment, because the conversation about those fights for federal R&D spending can be about public health, they can be about climate, they can be about pick your issue, but I think fundamentally the reality is that there is no alternative to federal investments in basic R&D, period, across the board. It's what's been driving our competitiveness, our prosperity in this country for many years, and there's not an alternative that's going to swoop in and fund those really high-risk, early-stage R&D projects, whether it's for, understanding our energy future or the
Quantum.
medical solutions that are going to help all of us and our families. So very important point to raise. Let's continue on this theme of talking about the people and collaboration and partnerships that it's going to take to bring this more sustainable future to bear. And I think we heard Jeremy talk about this. We need to make the energy transition real and relevant to people, and to be able to mainstream it at the level that we need. And so, Katrina, I want to come to you. Intersect Illinois has made a very strong point of aligning our state's climate and energy transition goals with the economic growth imperative, with the jobs it brings to Illinoisans, the wealth that it brings here. Can you talk a little bit more about some of those success stories, what's made them possible to communicate to all of us here?
Absolutely. So for some context, every 5 years, the state of Illinois adopts a 5-year economic plan. Within that plan, they outline the key industries that the state is focused on, not only for our business recruitment and attraction efforts, but also this is where we're doubling down when it comes to workforce training, investments within the state, incentive programs. So our last plan was adopted just this time last year, July of last year. Our outlook for these next 5 years, clean energy sits under that, along with quantum, agribusiness, our life sciences, TDL, and advanced manufacturing. So under clean energy, we have seen, even just in the last 6 months, a lot of project announcements in both the EV space and sustainable aviation fuel. So when we talk about industries that are tough to decarbonize, automotive manufacturing and aviation fuel. So here in Illinois, we recently start with Avena. So sustainable aviation fuel, Avena just announced an $830 million SAF production plant down in Southwest Illinois. That comes at the heels of Illinois passing the first in its nation SAF tax credit. So it's a $1.50 tax credit for off-takers for each gallon of sustainable aviation fuel that's purchased. Here in Illinois, we have O'Hare Airport, one of the most globally connected airports in the world, along with over 20, I think we're up to 28 regional, Midway International Airport, Rockford, huge cargo hub. So a lot of just aviation action happening here. And now on top of that, we are incentivizing the SAF industry. Electric vehicles. So Rivian just announced their 1.2 million square foot supplier park that in Normal, Illinois, next to their plant. That comes after they've made partnerships with the local community college to roll out an EV and energy storage training program, building that workforce and those skills, but now looking to localize their supply chain. Just this past legislative session, our REV program, the Reimagining Energy and Vehicles program, has now just gone through some modifications to start to incentivize those suppliers and those parts for electric vehicles. Another announcement just this past month, Demira, a Canadian electric minibus transit company, just announced their first U.S. manufacturing plant will be built in the greater Peoria area. That came with a lot of public-private partnership engagement to find a location that the company can not only bring in their existing units, but be in a state that prioritizes this sector, has clean energy goals, transit agencies that are looking to make that transition to electric vehicles, but also the workforce and people to partner with as well. So just a lot of activity in these sectors, but they're coming with the support of these different programs and initiatives that the state is rolling out as well.
That's great.
And is welcoming to foreigners.
Yeah.
You know, this is a fundamental thing. You know, a lot of the rest of the world looks at the United States and I thought America loved people from all over the world, loved immigrants, and they're seeing some things that they don't recognize right now. And that's not Illinois. And I was very proud of our governor when he went to Washington, D.C. recently and had his cage rattled about this. And he stood up for, no, Illinois is a state where everyone is welcome. The number one, according to the Wall Street Journal, number one real estate market in the country is Rockford. all right? And I live in Naperville, often rated as the #1 place to raise a family. And yet all of my staff, all the young kids on my staff, they want to live downtown in Chicago, where there's just so many great things to do. And so this is a competitive advantage that we have. And you didn't mention, when we're recruiting scientists, if you're trying to get a bioscientist to come in, many of them do not want to raise their daughter in a state that does not respect a woman's right to reproductive freedom. And that is a competitive advantage that we have that is driving. Oh, thank you. It's a competitive advantage that we should not be shy about pointing out.
Yes. So, and this ties to an audience question. I was thinking about how to make the link, but it's about our public transportation and building infrastructure for all in our state. Another of our great advantages that we are in a bit of a crisis moment on right now. So the question from our audience member is about the role of the Regional Transit Authority specifically, and what role it plays in ensuring that Illinois is, helping to fight the climate crisis, which, all public transportation is a big part of that, because no matter how much vehicle electrification, mass transit is a huge part of the solution in dense cities and other places. So anybody care to weigh in on the public transportation?
There's been a lot of back and forth on this, as folks know, in the legislature in the spring, and they were dealing with a lot of issues in the spring, many of them triggered by some of the dysfunction and the funding issues with our federal government. So it's unfortunate that we're not able to get all the way on the finish line on the transit system fix that they were working on, but there was a lot of good work that went into that from the governor's office, from both houses of the legislature. So I believe what we have right now is a bill that made it through one house of the legislature that all the stakeholders are feeling pretty good about. So we will see what the timing is, but my understanding is that the intent is to come back and finish the job on that. I know that's very important to many of our legislative leaders and also to the governor, and our public transit, our world-class public transit system, although there's always room for improvement, is certainly a competitive advantage and is a key part of our work in fighting the climate crisis.
It absolutely is. I was on social media just this morning looking at someone's top 10 things they love about Chicago, and routinely being able to take the CTA from their house on the far north side to the south side was one of them. So it is something we need to continue to invest in. Let's see. Katrina, let's see, you talked about the state's climate energy transition goals and a long list of things that, we can call on as successes for traction. Congressman Foster, I wonder, how are those wins resonating with your constituents on a day-to-day basis? Like some of the jobs that come with these big announcements around electric vehicles, how do you hear those landing with people?
Well, I think everyone is really interested in that. This all comes on a background of a lot of anxiety about artificial intelligence and what that's going to do. And the upside of that is that many of these technologies that we're talking about, like advanced nuclear, or nuclear generally, it's the engineering charges that really clobber the total project costs of these things. And so there's going to be a large class of projects, like developing new drugs, where you're going to be able to leverage AI and do things. Well, one way to describe it is that soon we're all going to have at our command an infinite number of PhD remote workers in the form of AGI. And when that happens, that it's the areas that can manage that new AI workforce that are going to be the ones that capitalize on it. And it's going to result in much lower engineering costs for a lot of projects. And so a lot of things you couldn't imagine doing before, you can imagine doing now. And we should really be rethinking and reimagining a much more ambitious set of things that we can do because of not having to be clobbered by the engineering costs.
Great. I'm going to take one more question from our audience, and then I want you all to be thinking about our wrap up and call to action, right? We're going to bring this home for everybody. So there are a whole series of questions here about how shifting to renewables is great, but really what it's allowing us to do is increase our total energy spending. And this really speaks to the point of AI, data consumption, like the total driver's not going down. There's one audience member who cited Bhutan. It's a country with negative carbon input. Are those goals realistic for us here in the United States, for others around the world? And how do we think about just the plans to overall, again, back to your point about bringing down the total amount of carbon and emissions that we're putting into the air? How do we think about that?
They are realistic. They must be realistic. We have set out a path in the Paris Climate Agreement, and whatever some members of the federal government may currently say, the state of Illinois remains committed to that, which means getting our emissions to zero and eventually negative by 2050 or before. And if we do not do that, we will not have a planet that is compatible with civilization as we currently understand it. So many times in America's history, we have been confronted with problems that seemed impossible at first, and through innovation and hard work, we have overcome them. So I think to be more specific about it, I do think that we have a lot of the tools that we already need to overcome these challenges right now. On the transportation side, we know how to make walkable and transit-oriented cities. We know how to make electric vehicles. Now we just need to build those things, design them, build the infrastructure, do it at scale. That's possible. We know how to heat and cool buildings in a carbon-free way. We know how to make clean energy through a mix of nuclear and renewables, and how to manage that and make it flexible. We know how to do that today. So maybe hydrogen, heavy industry, that's a couple years off, but for 80, 90% of this, we have the solutions right now, scalable, ready to go, and it is just a question of will and deployment. And so I would say it is possible. Let's not wring our hands about it. Let's get to work.
Yeah. Great. The other thing is cost, right? So we may have the know-how, we may have the will, we may get people convinced, but there is a cost to this transition. And I did want to get one more audience question in here, because these are all so good. There's a couple that are related to the relative costs of renewables versus ongoing building, maintenance, and operation of nuclear. And since we have multiple nuclear perspectives represented here, I think it'd be worth unpacking that just a little bit. How, really cost comparison.
Yeah. We spent a lot of time talking about this. When we started down this path of an energy transition, we built a lot of wind and solar, independent of storage, independent of firming. And what we're realizing is that the grid cannot operate on intermittent generation, and that we need firm power. And so how does that kind of pull together? Do we firm it up with storage? There are different trade-offs here, but we have to think about what are the different considerations of firm power. Is it natural gas with CCS? Is it renewables plus storage? Is it advanced nuclear? Is it geothermal and advanced geothermal opportunities? We saw a recent announcement from Meta and XGS on geothermal. Google made a similar announcement. So we're seeing these opportunities to manage the cost issue, to JC and Elena, to your point, around how do we bring capital to these problems from private industry. It's a pretty cool transition to these challenges, where we're seeing private industry finance and fund solutions to these problems. But it's a trade-off. There's no perfect solution. We're going to need all of the above energy solution here. We're going to need advanced nuclear. We're going to need solar and wind. We're going to need storage. We're going to need hydropower. We're going to need advanced geothermal. It's a matter of cost and frankly, location and use case. I think you had a great point around different opportunities for advanced nuclear to provide thermal power as well, and what that solution provides and has the potential to support. So there's a myriad of different considerations as we think about planning the energy system, but it does require us to plan the energy system.
Yeah, Colleen put it perfectly. I'll add, an example, right? There are specific applications where you absolutely need 24/7 firm power, and it's helpful if it's hot, right? And Dow Chemical is currently one of those examples in Seadrift, Texas. They've done the calculation, and they're a corporation, and they took a look at what was an option for replacing their coal plant in Seadrift, Texas, that sort of provides combined heat and power to a chemical facility. And they said, you know what? The right solution is going to be an advanced high-temperature gas reactor. And so they are building an X-energy plant there. And it is a specific case with a specific market and a higher price point, because there's a value in the firm hot power.
JC, you raised your eyebrows.
No, hey, I agree. I agree with everything that's said here. I think it is really about part of a complete breakfast. So there's a lot of tools in the toolbox, whatever analogy you want to use. I would push back a little bit on the premise of that question, which is like, well, are the economics better of existing nuclear or of new renewables? Like, the truth is we need to be keeping all of our existing clean power online, and that is, by the way, what we have done here in the state of Illinois through the carbon mitigation credits and other mechanisms. And then we need to be bringing all kinds of clean energy online as quickly as possible. There's a critical place for wind and solar. I think the base load power paradigm is a very 20th century paradigm that's like based on the idea that we can't be flexible with our demand and our supply. And I think it's critical that we learn to be more flexible. And I think Congressman Foster referred to earlier the importance of flexibility. So we do renewables, we do flexibility, we do efficiency, and all those together come up with a portfolio that is more efficient than any one of those things in isolation.
That's, yep.
I was just going to add, I love that you brought up the flexibility as well, because it's so important that we think about that. We have, there was a Duke study that recently was released, and this Duke study talks about what potential we have on the grid. 80% of the time, a third of our power plants are not operating, which is a huge amount of power. And so if we were to integrate flexibility, we would, and you curtail, I think they said 0.25% of time curtailment, which is so small, right? You would be able to add almost 80 gigawatts of new load on the grid. So we have overbuilt the system, how we manage that, how demand responsive, how we're able to integrate VPPs. Like, there's so much potential here to manage this grid. And to JC's point, we have to believe that we'll be able to do it.
Sorry, last thing. The more, too, that we can shift that load to some of those off-peak hours, the more efficiently we can use the grid that we have. The absolute most expensive and dirtiest power is at those really high peak times. And so the more we can shave the top off of those peak mountains and put them in the valleys, we can use our grid more efficiently. That's going to be cleaner, and it's also going to keep costs, to your point, down for everybody.
Right, and we clearly have the level of questions here. I know there are a lot of experts in this room, so I hope you'll all be able to stick around and have some conversation with our audience about that. I think one of the things that's very striking about this conversation, yes, full portfolio mix, location matters a lot, all of these different kind of gradations of how we manage our energy, very difficult for me as a consumer of energy, and to be a responsible, how do I even exercise choice in that space? I think that's one of the core problems we're seeing is how do we communicate that to the public, and how do we, a lot of these questions, I think, are speaking to this challenge of communicating about a very complex energy portfolio and how we make choices in the trade-offs in our all-of-the-above approach. Okay, so if I didn't get to your question, I'm sorry. These are fantastic, and I hope we'll have time after. But let's bring this home, because I know we have a reception at the other end of this. And I would love all of you to just fast forward 10 years to 2035. And what is one major success you hope we've achieved in the energy transition that we haven't talked about yet? Can be big, can be small. And what will have made it possible? Just one thing.
Yeah, I want to see the majority of unabated fossil plants, especially coal, in the United States on track for being replaced with small modular nuclear. And what makes that happen is a recognition that the battle is not between nuclear and renewables or solar panel spent fuel or solar panel waste and nuclear spent fuel. It is between unabated fossils and clean energy.
A variation on that, I'd say that we've hit our CEJA goals in the state of Illinois. And in 2035, that looks like taking the dirtiest fossil plants in the state offline. It looks like maintaining all of our existing clean energy fleet. And it looks like having a 40% of our energy come from clean on its way to 50 by 2040.
Great.
I also would have to go with the CEJA goal of also 1 million EVs on the road by, I think we said 2030, but 2035 they should be there. But I think for that to happen, we need a robust and equitable infrastructure of charging stations. So I think giving people that confidence as well.
So what I'd like to see is really sophisticated load management all the way down to the consumer level. Because what we've discovered, unfortunately, is if you give consumers the ability to, every day figure out when they're going to run their dryer at night, they do it for about 3 days and they say, okay, this is a pain. All right, in the near future, every one of our lives are going to be run by our AI personal assistant. And they will have the attention span to actually play this game properly. And you're going to see consumers that are going to be very willing to, or the agents, AI agents working for the consumers, willing to do that sophisticated trade-off to get a slightly better rate on their electricity. And that's going to make everything a lot more stable and easier to run. And that's what I'd like to see 10 years from now.
Great.
Actually, 3 years from now, actually.
Okay. That's right.
It's really hard to add any supplemental comments here, but I'll be predictable and say I'd like to see all of our nuclear power plants that can be relicensed, and uprated. And I'd also like to see the first couple nuclear power plants come online.
Great. And I'll add my own, which is
New nuclear power plants.
Yeah.
Obviously, we have a lot on.
Right. I will add my own, which is comes back to our Planet Aqua theme and some of Jeremy's comments about the blue planet we live on. And I hope we can get closer to really recognizing the integrated costs and benefits of our water and energy systems. This is something that, more than 40% of our total water withdrawals go to electric power generation, right? So this is material, we don't pay attention to it. We're doing continuously kind of citing projects in ways that don't take account for the groundwater and other water conflicts that those set up. So that's something I'm really optimistic we can make progress on here in the state in the next 10 years. But okay, we've got an audience that's really excited to inspire the next generation, and they're clearly invested in how we bring all of this forward. So let's wrap with one final call to action for them. What would you invite our audience to do so when we all reconvene here at the next SRI Congress, we've had some actionable steps taken to help bring this future forward? Any order.
Work with your local government on the energy you want to see.
Great.
Yep, get your solar panels, get your EV, get your heat pump, but also get out, get involved. These are structural problems. They cannot be solved through consumer choice. They have to be addressed through systemic changes in planning. That's the only way we're going to do it.
I agree with what's been said, and just vote and be an advocate for the sustainable and desirable energy transition that you want to see. You're here for a reason, and do what you can.
Just to do everything you can to defend against the assaults on the scientific capacity of this country. And that every one of you represented by someone who might be thinking of voting for these cuts, go in and make contact with them. Don't necessarily go to Washington, D.C., but go back home. Go or find people in your research group who came from those areas and meet in the areas that they grew up in, and explain that people all over the United States appreciate science, want to participate in science, and will not be happy if we gut the scientific capacity of this country.
Just collaborate to work towards solutions together.
Yeah. And I'll add my own, which is, just to wrap this up by saying, find someone who disagrees with you. I loved the disagreement on this panel today. There's, I know, many points of view. Seek out somebody who you know shares a completely different perspective on how we get to a more sustainable future. Find that person, have a great conversation, and let's build this together. So join me in thanking this incredible panel. Really appreciate you all. And then join all of us at the reception following this, and get ready for a great SRI Congress Day 2 tomorrow. Thanks, everybody. This is like the world's heaviest I've had.
All right.
Great
Exit
job.
stage left.
Oh.
What?
Wait.
Oh.
Where do you want us? Ooh, hot mic. I mean, those are so beautiful. Cool. Nice job, everybody.
I have the housekeeping. Oop, where's that remote? Oh, there it is. Okay, thank you to Elena. Let's give Elena another round of applause for a great job.
Thank you so much.
And of course, our incredible panelists for such a thoughtful and forward-looking conversation. You've helped us connect today's big ideas to the real-world systems and communities that they impact, and that's exactly what SRI is all about. And thank you for being part of a powerful first day at SRI 2025. From visionary speakers to bold ideas and meaningful conversations, today set the tone for a week of collaboration, creativity, and global momentum. Tonight, we invite you to join the opening night celebration, an evening of connection, conversation, and celebration to kick off the week. Whether you're reconnecting with colleagues or meeting new collaborators, it's a great chance to wind down and gear up together. Tomorrow, we look forward to seeing you at 9 o'clock right here for our opening plenary on One Health, which will explore holistic approaches for sustainable human and planetary health. We have many wonderful breakouts throughout the day, including 2 featured sessions. We have many networks of impact, amplifying sustainability through higher education collaboration in the morning, featuring university leaders from across the globe, and the future of sustainability reporting in the afternoon. Our main programming will conclude with our afternoon plenary, ethical and respectful scientific collaborations with Indigenous peoples. We're just getting started. Thank you again for your energy, your ideas, and your commitment to the future. We'll see you tonight and back here tomorrow morning for more bold thinking at SRI 2025. Thank you.